Yes, hi! Welcome to the Godward Show. When I read a novel by an author I've never read before, I generally keep my guard up, and I read it with an eye to criticism. But when I recently read Cormac McCarthy's just released and long-awaited novel The Passenger, I read it without any of that mistrust. The Road is close to being my favorite book, right behind Moby Dick, I suppose, and Blood Meridian isn't far behind. Even books like Suttree and Child of God are certainly in my top 20, and I've read lots of novels. As far as I'm concerned, this is, sort of one of the great pleasures of reading numerous novels by the same author. You get to know him, his voice, his personality, his psyche. Yeah, it's a one-way relationship, but it does actually feel like a relationship, like a friendship almost. You get to know a person. I feel like I know Cormac. And so for this novel, I was all ears. As you've probably heard, the book sort of opens with a compelling underwater dive to recover anything that might be left from a plane crashed in the water somewhere off the coast of New Orleans or thereabouts. The passengers in the plane are all dead, obviously, just sitting there in their seatbelts, and not a blemish on the plane itself. It's an eerie image. And it becomes sort of mysterious when we learn that one of the passengers was listed in the flight log but is missing from the plane. I say this book sort of opens with this scene because, in fact, it opens with one of McCarthy's recognizable italicized sections. In this case, a setting that will recur throughout this novel. It's a description of the hallucinations of Alicia Western, the younger sister of the diver sent to inspect the sunken airplane. So Bobby, the diver, and his sister Alicia are the children of one of the inventors of the atomic bomb, a sort of notorious, physicist. And they're both brilliant, although Alicia seems to be the math brains, whereas Bobby never really clicked in any academic discipline. Alicia's hallucinations are dominated by what seems to be one of those people that were born after their mothers took thalidomide early in the pregnancy back in the 1950s or early 60s, whenever that was, with little flipper-like arms and a keloidal bald head. The thalidomide kid paces around Alicia's room, talking with her, taunting her, teasing her, and showing her nearly lost old memories, and always sprinkling in the Lord's name in vain and calling her strange nicknames for, whatever reason. Is he a demon? I mean, it's not exactly clear what this is. He's also accompanied by a whole band of sort of weird merrymakers, sort of wearing their own strange costumes. And I wouldn't say really torturing Alicia, but like keeping her up at night. And this is the structure of the book. One short chapter of Alicia and the thalidomide kid, followed by a longer chapter featuring Bobby, mostly wandering around New Orleans, having dinner with some real characters. I've been to New Orleans once or twice, and the dandy who goes around by Long John and the transsexual character who dines with Bobby once or twice, both of these strike me as very plausible and kind of entertaining characters, to be honest. Compared to other McCarthy books, this one has a lot of dialogue in the usual sort of no quotation marks McCarthy style we've grown accustomed to. There's discussion of the downed aircraft, of the atomic bomb, actually a really long section on quantum mechanics. There's talk of the Holocaust and World War II, of why Lee Harvey Oswald couldn't have acted alone, of the specs on his rifle. But there's also quite a lot of common conversation about the troubled living situations of some of Bobby's friends and acquaintances, and about him missing his sister, memories of her, and so on. There are some elements at the opening of the novel that made me think it was going to be inspired by the television series Lost or something like that, like a metaphysical mystery. And there are portions where the relationship between the brother and sister reminded me of Salinger's Glass family in Franny and Zoe. Thematically, I think two things jump out. The first is uncertainty, and not just uncertainty, but like metaphysical mystery. What is real, what isn't, how can we know, and whom should we trust? And the second major theme follows from the first, and that is paranoia. So haunting this novel, and increasingly in the second half of it, are a pair of Men in Black style Agent Anderson feds who seem to follow Bobby Western wherever he goes, including up to Knoxville and possibly all the way to Idaho. Eventually, they put a lien on his bank accounts, freeze his credit, seize his automobile, all without actually arresting him or charging him with anything. So there's definitely a bit of like Kafka's The Trial sprinkled in here for good measure. So the final theme of the book seems to be related to an unresolved cosmic chaos. This is why people will sometimes think of McCarthy as trading in ideas of nihilism. I don't think that's quite right, because while he puts the question so persistently, not all of his characters give up and kill themselves. Yeah, some do, but not all of them. Some stick around, they persist, they try their best to find meaning, or at least to endure the journey. And are we given like consolation in all of this? I mean, it's not a Ragged Dick sort of happy ending sort of story, but if you think of the end of The Road, where the son or the kid, the child there sort of eventually like meets the other tribe, and frankly, like he survives, right? But also there is the consolation of the language itself. That is to say, like, yes, we're reading about this end of the world, apocalyptic, terrible situation, but it's beautifully written. So there's like your brain is going to process the two things differently. And in that final paragraph in The Road about the salmon and the way they used to be colorful and stuff, like it's so beautiful that your mind, I don't know, is sort of able to handle it at the end. So there's a little bit of that kind of consolation, I think, going on in this book. The resolution to all of this uncertainty and paranoia, well, it never quite comes together in this volume. And by the way, this is only the first in a 2-volume set. The second one is called Stella Maris. That's the name of the mental hospital where Alicia Western is sort of eventually is committed. And I think that one's going to be released like December 7th or somewhere in there this year. So maybe it'll be resolved in there, but I wouldn't expect it. And I don't say this as a criticism necessarily. If indeed these 2 books are sort of the swan song publication of one of America's best writers, I don't think we should expect McCarthy to, wrap it up neatly and put a bow on it for us. That's not who he is. And frankly, I don't think it would be worthy of the American literary tradition. I can't leave this review without remarking on the language itself. Again, in my mind, McCarthy is as good as it gets in terms of literary prose. In this respect, the novel is probably a little uneven. It contains a few passages worthy of Suttree with that like atmospherically thick description of setting that some of us love. But most of it's pretty easy reading, to be honest, and some of the dialogue feels almost throwaway. Discussion about, what to drink with dinner, or Vietnam stories, or like whatever that kind of doesn't really reveal much about the characters or move the plot. McCarthy fans should obviously read this book. I don't know that it's his best necessarily, but I will read it again after I read Stella Maris. As Cormac himself is like past age 90 now, I really appreciate what he accomplished in his life, and I sure hope that he's got a worthy successor out there somewhere in America. It seems impossible now, but I guess it was almost already impossible even during Cormac's run. But who knows? As long as there are readers looking for it, maybe that creates the demand. Hey, thanks for listening to this sort of special postscript episode of the Godward podcast. And if you like it, check out my podcast archive. See you later.